Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Student of the Game. I am Kyle Nash, the Student of the Game. And listen, if you're here, chances are you like talking sport. We're glad you're doing it with us here tonight on one of the various places, whether it be the Huddle Up Podcast YouTube channel, bing, whether it be the Sertobia Media YouTube channel where the struggle is real to be awesome, bing. Let's see, all my basic socials and stuff. You'll see the Twitter handle there. I have a Twitch with the same name. Student of the Game on Facebook, A7BN Sports, Facebook Live, all that other happy stuff. If I'm forgetting something, well, you'll find it later, I'm sure. And of course, you may also be listening to it on demand by way of the various pods and however you enjoy doing your podcasting. But listen, I know I normally do an intro at this part, and frankly, it would be better served if you just listen to the Huddle Up Podcast this week. The long of the short is this. If you needed better proof for why FSU did not belong in the playoff and the team in the current state that it's in, I can't give you a better example without Alabama winning the game outright this past weekend, which they almost did. And of course, I'll get into it with my first host, Matt Muehleisen, of course, of the Huddle Up Podcast, the AJ Hawk of the Huddle Up Podcast, patient zero lately as he's been so sick. But then also after that, the Markcast is jumping aboard. My guy Reid, who does everything spring football, Canadian football. This guy is more of a football junkie than pretty much anybody I immediately know. Certainly the biggest junkie I know out west. He's going to jump in later on tonight once we figure out the picks. And I mentioned we're glad you're here with us. I'm technically on a pre-record too. I'm covering UCF women's basketball for the Black and Gold Banneret, bing, the Big 12 home opener. And listen, whether you like it or not, women's basketball in college is getting to be a bigger thing. Something, Caitlin Clark, whatever. That's all fun. But I'm glad to be involved with covering Big 12 basketball this year, men's, women's, and otherwise, with the Black and Gold Banneret. That's a fun time all the way on. Hey, I mentioned bowl games. Don't forget to check out my work with the 3-point conversion, giving you stuff from the Cure Bowl, the Citrus Bowl, the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl, the Pop-Tarts Bowl. Oh, yeah, and then the Black and Gold Banneret, the whole Gasparilla Bowl thing. I think that's all the housekeeping. Well, hold on just a second. Okay. I'm about to have patient zero on. I want to make sure I'm ready for him to come in just to make sure. And of course, the Huddle Up Podcast, Matt Muehleisen. Matt, are you feeling well? Do I need this?
I don't think you need it anymore. I think I'm finally back to 100%. So
okay, because the whole it made me sad. The whole hilarity by default thing no longer being a thing anymore because Demos got married. So it was an emotional thing. I'm glad I don't need to look at that and talk to you. Shouts to Demosthenes Euclid, the soon to be married Demosthenes Euclid. Check out Hilarity by Default YouTube channel. The required viewing still there if you want some laps. But speaking of laps, I gotta say this before we get into the football and all this other stuff and FSU fans, including our own EJ Christian, still crying, whatever. Shohei Ohtani, as the guy who presides over the Pitch podcast for the Huddle Up Network, I haven't had a chance to talk to you about that yet. What do you make of, listen, Dr. Evil's using the pinky on that contract. Yeah. I think it's a proper signing, though, but I'm not a baseball guy. We're well clear on my lack of knowledge in stickball. Did it make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that in terms of target comp, overall, the $700 million was probably in range with what most people were expecting. And Los Angeles being the team to give it to him wasn't necessarily too surprising. Figured it would be an LA or a New York market that would target his services and ultimately win out. And it seems that he enjoyed enough of sunny LA and just wanted to be on the winning side of the city as he joined the Dodgers as opposed to realigning with the Angels.
The Angels of Anaheim, right?
The Angels of Anaheim, yeah. So I think that in terms of total compensation, I wasn't surprised. The layout of the contract itself surprised me in terms of the backloaded deal that they have and the nuances of how that whole thing plays out. But I know baseball can kind of get a little creative with how they structure contracts due to the absence of a salary cap. So we joke about the Mets and the Bobby Bonilla backloaded deal that is still being paid off to this day. I don't think that Shohei's contract is necessarily the same, but I know that initially he's not receiving as much. So it'd be more in the latter years of his career that he's going to be getting the bulk of the contract, but a smart play overall from LA to keep options open in terms of adding other players to their team, which they ultimately did with Yamamoto. And smart for Shohei because he's guaranteed that money no matter what happens in his career. So good for him, good for Los Angeles. And I know that in terms of marketing and merchandising, that they're going to see the benefits of having international sensations, multiple now on their team.
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you touched on the Bonilla thing because my understanding was, Bonilla 2.0 being a worst case scenario was on the table, but hopefully they can manage it a little better than that. And then LA, listen, to be any sort of a successful sports market franchise in a market like LA, where there's just so much other stuff going on in the town, the people in general aren't, let's just say, the most diehard sports fans beyond the Lakers, and even they can be rather fickle at times.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's kind of a required move. Like you needed the Rams to chase after Stafford and OBJ and make that Super Bowl happen for people to be interested. I feel like the reason why Spanos locked up Justin Herbert with the Chargers was to get something in there that was shiny. Kings, at some point in the history with a quick goalie and then going way back. I mean, they had Gretzky at 185 years old, all these kinds of moves. I could go on, but honestly, I'm forgetting other examples of it. But certainly Ohtani and any other pickups they've made have made for an explosive offseason, and you can tell they're actually trying to compete as kind of that Yankees West.
Right. And that was ultimately never really an issue for the Dodgers. They've always been kind of willing to spend the money more so than their counterparts in Anaheim. And I think that kind of speaks to what they're aiming to do. Not that Anaheim didn't spend money. I mean, they certainly have the Mike Trout contract they can point to, the Pujols contract that they could point to back in the day. So making efforts, but not having the results, I think ultimately is what doomed that franchise, not really putting it all together. So we'll see how it plays out for the Dodgers, but ultimately a team that has surpassed expectations both past regular seasons and then fallen flat in the postseason, as tends to happen sometimes with the big payroll teams. Look at the Yankees, look at ultimately the Phillies, the Mets not even making it to the dance this year. So I think it just kind of, it's let's see how this plays out sort of feel in baseball, because it's one of those things where the most money doesn't ultimately mean the best team like it does in the NBA, in the NFL.
Yeah, well, and I'll say this too. Also, first of all, with all these deals going on in LA, I condone, or rather show condolences to your Philadelphia's Philly season already being over.
Correct.
That in mind, we're going to go ahead and move on, because if I spend more than 10 minutes with a greater number of minutes talked about baseball than talking trash on Notre Dame, like a dam somewhere breaks. So let's move on. With that in mind, let's get into a little college football. Let's touch a little bit on these these semifinal games, I should say. I mean, listen, the Josh Heupel romping of the Hawkeyes of Iowa over there at the Citrus Bowl, not exactly gripping football, right? The Oregon Ducks squatting on the Liberty Flames there just merely to keep their tail feathers warm and for nothing else. Fine. I get it. I was going to say Chip Kelly, Brian Kelly and the family there, LSU, sneaking past the Badgers. That's adorable and everything. But the night that was the college football playoff, man, I listen, I've waxed poetic enough in other places, do the AJ Hawk thing, like the cigar, and let me know what you thought of the games, man.
Yeah, I think that they both kind of played out the way a lot of people thought they would. Alabama, Michigan were really known for what their defenses were doing this season. Not that they couldn't score points if they had to, but that ultimately wasn't how either team kind of made their mark this season. It was more so what they could bring to the defensive side of things. And I think that game in particular kind of showed that there was a lot of mistakes that were, self-inflicted and also forced on by the defenses, by the special teams. I don't think that Michigan had overcoming multiple special teams gaffes in their plans moving forward, and rightfully so. And it ultimately almost cost them, but didn't. So they survived that. And I think we see a lot cleaner of a game in the national championship. I think that certainly is going to be one of the things focused upon. But that pass rush of Michigan, I think, obviously Alabama wasn't expecting it. I necessarily wasn't expecting to see 5 sacks in the first half alone from the Michigan defensive line and linebackers squad. So I think that was a lot of creativity that they utilized to catch Alabama off guard, and ultimately could have played a role in, some of the mishaps that we saw from the center then the rest of the game. Is he trying to force things too quickly to get up onto the block because he's been blown past a few times? Did that ultimately impact those poor snaps? I know that Herb Street tried to put a little bit of it on Milroe, but he can only do so much when things are flying through the dirt. So that game in particular was one that I was kind of not necessarily looking forward to, just because I don't necessarily enjoy either of those programs for obvious reasons as a Notre Dame fan. But I think ultimately, just wanting to see a good game, we were treated to that.
Well, hey, I'll say this much. You don't have to worry about me hitting the Marge button, because at least you're brave enough to diss Penn State, your wife's team, when it's time to do so. And I don't have the soundboard when you hit the clat earlier, but I'll do my own, and rightly so, with that in mind there, too. There's just the reason why I feel like the downside to the top 4 playoff is these 4 teams all belong. There's no question. The whole reason this was created was to keep an FSU, who snuck their way to an undefeated record, playing lesser teams, from getting into the dance, especially when they have a hurt quarterback, right? I think in the past, not this most recent, but earlier incarnations of TCU, earlier in the life of the playoff, I don't think they should have been in the top 4 themselves. They're hiring marketing firms and stuff to do that, to overcome what they're showing on the field, the lack of a conference championship, things like that. Now, every conference actually has a championship game, which is why your Notre Dame Irish suck. They keep sneaking past it because they can hide. Hey, listen, I make that joke, honestly, Matt, but I'll say this much, too, for the Irish. I was really hoping they make it to the Citrus Bowl this year. They're a far better football team this year, in my opinion. Like, they're better than the team this year, in my opinion, or at least more complete than the team that beat Clemson to win the ACC when they fully acknowledge their conference and affiliation properly in 2020. Like, so I don't know if you agree with that, but for all the shade I wanted to throw that out there too. But
yeah, I think this team more complete than in years past. I think there was just a lack of creativity on the play calling side of things offensively that led to some shortcomings. Certainly against Clemson, definitely against Ohio State. The Louisville game is such an anomaly that I don't even think, given a different play caller, we win that game. There just seemed to be a lot of things going wrong against Louisville for Notre Dame. But I think overall, the team underperformed, but would have been a better facet in the Citrus Bowl this year than in years past.
Well, hey, listen, the only person I know who's pounding the table harder to give credit to that win than Louisville would be FSU fans. Anyway, so with all that in mind, we got the big game with Alabama and just a battle of trench warfare. And if the first game with Bama and Michigan was Saving Private Ryan and demonstrating trench warfare, the night game was certainly the gunfight at the OK Corral with Tombstone or a movie like that, because that, sir, was a gunfight of the finest order, definitely a shootout. And listen, did Caleb Williams prove what I've been saying, that he done got stolen from the Heisman? Am I wrong to start banging that drum?
I don't think so. And I think a lot of that is the reasoning behind Washington's move out of the Pac-12 is, unfortunately for them, a lot of late starts for their games doesn't get the media attention that the primetime games do. And so, wrongfully so. I think a lot of people overlooked what Penix did this season just because they didn't watch the games because, who's going to want to stay up until 1 a.m. The networks don't even give it too much coverage at that point. So I think that ultimately it just kind of was one of those things where we saw the wrong person get the award just because they were in more highly prolific games based on the, call it family or whatever else that was kind of the reasoning for getting those games the national attention. But I think that you're certainly correct in that there was a disservice done to the rightful winner of the Heisman this season.
Listen, I saw you do multiple things there. I know you delivered it dry and subtle because that's how you roll, buddy. But don't think I didn't notice the family drop in there. Okay. And second, I also saw the reverse clap with the wrongfully so. You're not fooling anybody on this podcast, Matt. I'm not hating, I'm appreciating, but I don't want you to think you got off scot-free there. Okay.
Appreciate that.
At day's end, though, we mentioned the two different styles of game. By the way, great points in the factors you mentioned about the realignment and why the Pac-12 is dissolving such as it is, and why the Big 12 looks attractive to former Pac-12 teams, why certain teams move to the SEC, specifically USC and UCLA, right? This is like, if you can't get Texas to watch the game, you're on too late, baby. I mean, the 7 million viewer drop off from Saturday's game of Bama, Michigan to Texas and Washington. Now, I'll grant part of it is the Big Ten and the SEC's top programs being involved. Like, I think the only way you'll get more viewership is if the next game was maybe Georgia, Ohio State. I don't know. That's a lot of red. But
yeah.
What was that?
I said, yeah.
Yeah, that a 7 million viewer drop off seems like a lot to me.
And kickoff for that was what, 9:10, 9:15, right?
Was it 8:45? Oh well, no, actually, it would have been Texas time 8:45. So it's still pretty damn late. I mean, listen, I know it's not a work night, but damn, like, what are we doing here? I don't know.
Yeah, like poor planning on that, but I mean, ultimately, it had to be that way just because of the length of the other game going into OT. I think it impacted that kickoff time too. So
the main impact is the length of the day. Like, that's a quadruple header if you're looking at it, right? They got the morning bowl, the late morning bowl, the afternoon. Well, actually, I should say morning, afternoon, because they got basically two midday games, right? And then the two playoff games successing each other after that. So yeah. I don't know, man. Do you need the fourth one?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think they can get away with 4 New Year's Day games and be just fine.
We did have the anomaly too that it was preceded by NFL festivities as well. Like, I don't often have it on a Monday like that. I know a lot of NBA fans. Christmas is for basketball. How dare they invade? Hey, listen, it's the calendar, bro. When Christmas is actually taking the week and falls on a Friday again to do us all the great service of a wonderful 3-day weekend, we'll be better then. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Let's jump to it. This week, this coming week, I say weekend, but I don't count Monday. That's a me problem. I know we talked about it on Huddle Up, but I'll have you come here on the show. Who you got? You got Michigan or you got Washington?
So it's tough for me. Obviously, as a Notre Dame fan, I'm not going to pick Michigan. I don't think I'll be surprised if they ultimately do get the job done and win the national championship. But I think for me, kind of what I saw in that game, Michigan versus Alabama, do they have the same level of success? Obviously, I don't think that they're going to make the same number of mistakes on their end, the special teams play, getting away with a first pass of the game being intercepted, if not for the foot being out of bounds briefly. I don't think that we see that same level of miscues just because of now a more recent game being played. A 30-day layoff is certainly going to impact some facets of the game. But that being said, I think what we saw out of Michigan's defense is something that Washington can kind of be a little bit more prepared for, just based on who we have quarterbacking Washington versus who we have quarterbacking Alabama. Milroe has made the throws this season when he's had to, but it's always been against a lesser opponent, Georgia aside. And I think that kind of is one of the things that caught up to him in that game, is just he was used to being able to either scramble quickly out of the pocket. Michigan took that away, or just try to fling it deep, hope for the best. And it ultimately didn't really work out that way for Alabama. I think Penix is just kind of a more complete quarterback in that he can do those things in terms of escaping the pocket when he has to, but he has a lot more, I think, awareness down the field and pre-snap in terms of where he wants to go with the ball, and a better ability to read defenses that I think Michigan won't have that same level of success on the defensive front that they did against Alabama. So that's why I can see Washington winning that game, just because of the offensive capabilities that they have at receiver, should running back be healthy, and then certainly with the should have been Heisman winner calling his shots.
Yeah, no, I think that's a strong point. By the way, Reid Johnson, according to EJ Christian on the Huddle Up Podcast, allegedly cleared to play. Not sure what percentage he'll be at, to your point.
How much of an impact he can make, and based on the injury that we did see, and him coming back from that.
Yeah, and I know the injury gave Texas a chance to take a shot to tie the game up at the very least, if not outright win. But Washington's defense held, and I think the team that won that game should have that version of it anyways. And listen, when you got that many turnovers as a Texas team, you can't, you're battling Michael Penix. I mean, props to you for getting it that close. I'll give you that much credit for sure. And listen, I'm somebody who's a practitioner of trench warfare, offensive lineman action. It's what I do. That's where I live. I don't know if you have another podcaster that you deal with, Matt, that focuses more on the trenches than I would be surprised.
I doubt it.
However, the stuff you just mentioned about the offense being as potent as it is for Washington's obviously a thing. And I believe Michigan has to play what I call dinner defense or supper defense, meaning concentrate less on stopping the short plays or the receivers earlier in the routes. They're going to get those. That's fine. Capitulate that. Maybe on occasion the defensive front will win. But keeping it in front of you and bending, not breaking, might be the best way to do it, so you don't give up that big play to put yourselves down quickly. Because with the boa constrictor style of game, which, I mean, I know I'm going to hit the clat, give him credit for that term, and rightly so. I haven't heard anybody else but him use it earlier in the season. I'll leave it at that. But if you have a group that's relying on playing a full 60 minutes of minimizing you, and you have an offense that just needs one big play to put 6 on the board, you got to dominate for a long time, and that is no easy concept. By the way, Washington in the trench is not exactly terrible. I feel like it's a situation where if Michigan doesn't get home, Penix will make them pay for it. And it's going to come down. There's going to be a few long throw attempts, and whether those make or miss, I think will make or break that game. Against my instincts, I'm going to pick Washington in the contest, but would not be surprised to see my guy Jim Harbaugh lifted above his head, and the only thing the nation can do at that point is eat a hamburger to deal with their sorrows. Anyways, speaking of sorrow, all right, listen. I had our good friend Jim Neeson last week, 2 weeks ago, I forget exactly which, to make me believe in the Cowboys. With the way your Eagles have looked in the past month, make me believe that this is still the team that made it to the Super Bowl like I predicted they would.
I think it's tough to really make that argument at this point, just because of the drop-off we've seen from the offensive play calling and the defense in general. And I think that this kind of goes back to one of those things that has been kind of something that Eagles fans have pounded the table for, is just the neglect of addressing the linebacker situation. Now, granted, there's been injuries to that position, but a lot of what made the pass rush so good last year was that linebackers were doing a better job dropping into coverage. Lockdown corners were stepping up and making sure that coverage didn't exist. Now the ball's getting out within 2-3 seconds. That pass rush can't get home. There's an outlet pass every single play. And I think that injuries again have been a part of that, but not the whole picture.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that kind of is what gives me a lot of pause to really buy into this team turning it around. I think offensively they have the capability to turn things around, but as we saw against the Cardinals, if your defense can't get off the field, it doesn't really matter what your offense is doing. And so if we're supposed to believe in the Eagles as a serious contender to make and win the Super Bowl, I think I needed to see a lot more than what we've seen these past few weeks. The Giants game, I will kind of give as an anomaly. We had a blown coverage for sure that was on the defense, but you have a fluke play in the Boston Scott running into his own man and fumbling the ball, giving the Giants the ball at the 14, and then Dallas Goedert falling out of his break, leading to basically a walk-in pick six for the Giants. I wasn't necessarily ready to say this team is doomed after that game, but after what I saw from Arizona and them just being unable to stop any facet of that team, I mean, the 199-yard pick six that they did get is the only instance of the defense preventing a score, and that was on a miscommunication similar to what we saw the week before in the Giants-Eagles game. So not necessarily something I'm going to give too much credit for to the defense.
I mean, as amazing as the play is, you wonder if the communication issue was from Kyler Murray not having a gaming headset on. Anyways, I know I know that's a cheap shot, and it's not even necessarily true allegedly, but it's funny. Anyways, no, listen, I know that a lot of the shots taken on are against towards the defense there. And I tried to make this point on the Huddle Up podcast, but Cowboy fan EJ Christian wouldn't shut up for 5 bleeping seconds. I was watching the Brett Coleman YouTube channel, and he pointed out something that I hadn't caught immediately myself, and that's the insistence on the Eagles trying to live in either the shotgun or the quarterback sneak, or you're allowed to call it the brotherly shove. I do like that name. That's an acceptable name. You know, this belittling of the offensive linemen with this tush push slander just makes me want to throw things. I've already done that rant. You can check the reel on my Facebook page. Bing! The student of the game. But I feel like the issue is the defense is a factor, and injuries, you could write that off. Maybe they took a few gambles too many sticking with older players like Slay and Bradbury. I can see that argument. For me, I think the bigger miss is Shane Steichen. Because days in, you have an offense. You have an offensive line with which you could probably rule the world when Lane Johnson is fully healthy, by the way. I know that was a factor in the season too. This is why I don't gloat with the evil laugh with you like I do against Cowboy fans. I take that Lane Johnson missing thing seriously. That's just where I live. As somebody who preaches all the time about the importance of Trent Williams on the Niners offense. It's the same thing to me. But am I out of line to think that the problems more start with the offense than they do the defense? Because I feel like the defense are put in a lot worse situations week in, week out as well.
They are. There's a lot more 3-and-outs this season than I think we're accustomed to seeing. And a lot of that goes to the either refusal or I don't know what to call it, to run the ball like they did last season. Last year, a lot of the Eagles' success was based on that offensive line just bullying people out of the way and them running the ball, whether it was Jalen, whether it was Sanders, whether it was Boston Scott, whoever they're giving the ball to, they were making that kind of the main focal point of their offense, especially late in games when you have a lead and you're protecting it. You've seen them go away from it this year. A lot of questionable play calls that we've seen too. A lot of wide receiver screens that have not worked at all, that we continue to go back to that well for some reason. A lot of
that goes hand in hand with the handoff from the shotgun thing, not to cut you off, but yeah, if you're still trying to run the ball and you can't do it inside because everyone's reading it, then you have to go to screens. And those then get eaten up because they know what you're doing. Hey, listen, you know where else I've seen this? Jacksonville. Because that interior line is bad, way different from Philadelphia, I might add. Something Hall of Famer Jason Kelsey, more on that later. But I feel like they know that they're not going to throw the ball down the field because of what they have. I can't. I feel like I don't know what it is that keeps them from throwing the ball down the field. They don't really get great separation like they used to. And I think it's because the run game is less of a threat because opposing defenses know they could gobble it up front. Why bite up when you're trying to run from the shotgun and defenses have better angles to get that penetration they need to stop it? And then thus, if you're just able to not worry about that, then you could gobble up the screens all the same there too, because those are predictable as well. I think you mentioned running the ball. I don't know that they're running it more or less per se. I haven't looked at the numbers, but I know they're doing it from shotgun more. So, and I think that's the biggest thing. Steichen was not afraid to put Jalen under center. It's not as if you do that anyway with the quarterback sneak and then can turn that into a very believable play action fake that A.J. Brown could kill somebody with. But
right.
What do I know? I'm just a student of the game.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents on it, man. And are you capitulating at this point that they're not going to win the Super Bowl?
I would be surprised if they made it past the divisional round at this point.
So, okay. So, yeah, I think they win a playoff game, too, especially since they're either going to hapless Tampa Bay or I mean, do we really think the fraud cons might host them? I guess that's the best case scenario for the Eagles, perhaps.
Yeah, who knows? But I think, with the NFC South and all 4 teams on willingness to even win the division, I think that's kind of a matchup that could work out in the Eagles' favor. If they are going to advance beyond that, they need a lot of cleaning up, and I don't think they have enough time to clean up that much.
I mean, a Cowboys reunion is on the board. I don't think it happens, mind you, but I mean that would involve a 6-seed victory. Whoever that's going to end up, I think that's the Rams. That would involve a Rams victory over
Lions.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's possible, but I don't know. I'll put it this way: if the Rams handle what they're doing with the Lions and the Eagles see them, that's definitely a second round win for you guys. I think in that case, but that's going to be a shootout game where in the past it would have been a lot more interesting. I'll leave that at that. Yeah, time for some picks. Let's do some picks, man.
Yeah.
All right. So with that in mind, we'll head over to it here. I mean, listen, the best thing about week 18 in my mind, there's no Thursday night football. Starting out on Saturday, the Steelers do battle with Lamar Demetrius Jackson, possibly, and the Ravens. Matt, who you got?
I have the Steelers in this one. I think the Ravens will likely, keep their legs fresh for a quarter, maybe a full half. But I know Harbaugh's smart enough and has seen enough to try to gamble too much with how long he's keeping his main guys in, especially what we saw in years past, weeks past with the Dolphins. So I think that the Steelers ultimately win that game just due to lack of urgency on Baltimore's end.
I hear that, but I'm gonna pick the Ravens to win this one because I think they play Lamar Demetrius Jackson for at least a half. Because if you have an opportunity to stop a team on the throat and get them out the tournament, you do it. And I know John Harbaugh's also been long enough to have been burned or see teams burned by that. I mean, hell, one could argue that sort of thing had happened at some point. I forget the year, but I mean, the Bengals and the Steelers, I think, went through something similar with a final week of the season into the playoff matchup. And yeah, I don't know. I have the Ravens for that reason. You could be just as correct. That's why the whole Lamar Demetrius Jackson concept is a factor. And who knows? Maybe you'll hear about him on the show again next week, regardless of what happens, because of Student of the Game superlatives with my guy Mikey Byrne jumping on. Hey, another Huddle Up Podcast participant. There we go. Yeah, it's almost like are we a family? Is that safe to say? I don't know. Anyways, the Texans head over to Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis to do battle with the Colts. Matt.
Yeah, this one's a little bit tougher for me. I think that I've discounted Indianapolis too many times this season, and they've ultimately gone on to win. But I think with Stroud returning and Houston knowing what's on the line, I think that ultimately Houston ends up winning this match.
I mean, listen, everyone has underestimated the Colts in some way, shape, form, or fashion this season. I am among them. Colts fans are among them. But CJ Stroud is back. You expect me to pick Uncle Rico over him? Sorry, Gardner Minshew. Not going to happen. I, too, have the Texans here in this one. The Browns do battle with the Bengals. The reason why this one game probably isn't a big deal is neither team's playing air quotes for anything. I would have the Bengals here because I think Browning's trying to impress people. What do you think?
Yeah, I think ultimately Cleveland's locked into that 5 spot. And I think that matches up well for where they want to be. So similar to the Ravens situation where, they'll have Flacco in for a half. They'll probably bench a lot of their starters come the second half, and Cincinnati at home ultimately wins.
I can't front on that. Minnesota, the Vikings do battle with Detroit. Madden Campbell doing the thing, trying to keep alive in the 3rd seed. Or no, actually, yeah, they pretty much got that locked up. I guess he's trying to jump up to the 2, I suppose.
Yeah, potential to get to the 2, which is why I would have Detroit, not just for emotion purposes coming off of the loss against the Cowboys and them likely wanting to prove a point. I think a lot more of that would be saved for a 2-3 matchup in the playoffs is when that would play more of a role than in this one. But I think that with Campbell knowing they do have a possibility of getting to that 2 seed, they'll certainly be out ready to play. And Minnesota's revolving door of QBs doesn't really pose too much of a threat for that.
Yeah, I know the term trust gets mocked a lot around here, but I do not trust Minnesota to do anything else than get their skull banged in. See what I did there? Anyways, the Titans host the Jacksonville Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence apparently looks like he's going to be playing at this point. No CJ Beathard starting. For better or worse, we'll see. But the Titans starting Tannehill at this point, as I understand it here on Wednesday during the week, as the mayonnaise messiah Will Levis will not be available. Matt, who you got?
I think this one's a little interesting for me because Jacksonville will kind of know where they stand going into the game with Houston and Indianapolis playing the night before. So I think there's potential for maybe one of those teams to win the division somehow, some way if Jacksonville were to lose. But
That's
I think we'll know that already going in. So I'll still pick Jacksonville either way. But I think that if they've already got that 4 seed locked up, then we'll see a more reserved approach. Doug's usually pretty good at keeping his guys healthier than risking anything for a meaningless game. So I think that ultimately, either way, whoever's playing quarterback for Jacksonville, I would trust a little bit more than whoever's playing quarterback for Tennessee.
But Doug doesn't have a golf cart for Trevor. What do you mean, man? Anyways, no, I'm with you on that overall. I'm pretty sure the Jags need to win to secure that divisional spot, and that's an outright factor. So there's no holdback here. The Jags, as a franchise, are very hateful of the Titans, their division rival. It's another Week 18 episode, which is essentially a play-in game in similar fashion to last year. Granted, not an outright must-win, despite what EJ Christian might say. They can technically lose and still somehow, through magic, make the playoffs. But listen, control the destiny if you're Jacksonville. Crush Tennessee. They're designed to stop the run and have done pretty well against Derrick Henry in the past. I think they do it again here and capitalize and get that 10th win for me perfectly, predicting the record of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Because that's what it's all about, how right I am, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next on the docket, here's a real who cares. The Jets and the Patriots, Matt.
I guess I'll just take the Jets because they've looked like an actual football team a few times this season where the the Patriots have really not, even in wins. So give me the New York Jets.
I will say that the Patriots are the ones that have looked closest to a football team last week. But granted, that was because the Bills, so I don't know what to think. You know what? I like Robert Saleh. I'll take the Jets on the road. Sure, I changed my mind. Anyways, the Fraud Cons head to the New Orleans Saints. There on the road. Listen, I'm just gonna say it. The Fraud Cons, it's in the name. I don't believe in them. I got the Saints handling business. What about you?
I also do. I've seen the Saints kind of come up and win games when they've needed to this year. I haven't really seen that from Atlanta, including a loss to the Panthers. So give me the Saints.
Hey, I mean, after all, they're not starting Desmond Ridder. It will at least be close, right? Anyways, I tried to tell you, but you wouldn't listen. The Bucks battle Carolina. Do you see the Bucks struggling here, Matt? I don't.
Nope. Not even if Baker is hobbled, I'd still say they win.
So what I hear you saying is it's Tampa and your Eagles next week. Moving on.
Yep.
I'll go right to that game because I don't think you're bitter enough with your squad to think that they lose to the Giants even in East Rutherford, right?
No, I know that we're supposed to get some weather up here in the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic region, so I could certainly be at a low-scoring affair, but I think that ultimately the Eagles have heard enough. They've seen enough in terms of what they need to do, that if they can't right this ship here, then that certainly speaks to their efforts in the playoffs. But I think that this is one that they will ultimately win. They've had New York's number for the past several matchups, and with New York having nothing to really play for and not even like an opportunity to knock the Eagles out of the playoffs, then I don't see them getting up as much for this game as they did a couple weeks ago.
I'll say this, from a morale perspective, this is a must win, because if the Eagles blow this game, then they're just like continuing to circle that drain. They're backing into the playoffs. I'm not here to say that means Tampa could win, but it would put them Eagles in my mind mentally in position to lose to themselves, and then a team like the Bucks taking advantage in round one, as we've seen happen so many times in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Anyways, I use the term must win, but at least I properly qualified it. Anyways, the Denver Broncos and the Las Vegas Raiders. Matt.
I kind of like the Raiders in this one just because they've been playing a little bit more energized since the coaching change. The defense certainly has, at least. And with all the uncertainties that are going on in Denver right now, I don't think that's another situation where morale doesn't seem to be high, and it could ultimately benefit a division rival in the Raiders.
I hear you. The morale is the reason why I have. Imagine a world where the Raiders have the higher morale in the front office. Oh my God. Anyways, the Bears do battle against the Green Bay Packers, they're hosting the Bears. Do you have confidence the Packers hold serve?
I do. Just based on some of what we've seen out of the Packers recently, and I think them knowing that this is one that they absolutely have to have. We saw them not get the deal done last season. I think they learn on past mistakes and ultimately make the playoffs this year with a win over Chicago.
You know who I think's learning? Matt Fields. And this dude's campaigning for a new job somewhere. And by the way, Eberflus is also playing for his job in my mind. And that defense has played better than it has for some time. Call me a shocker here, but I'm going to go with the Bears on this one. I just feel like the Packers, I don't love what they do with Jordan. They've had some success, but at day's end, it was an opportunity for me to use the cheesy pun, so I went with it. Anyways, let's see. Let's do Seattle heading over to Arizona to battle the Cardinals. Matt.
Yeah, despite the win last week, I don't think that Arizona is going to catch lightning in a bottle again against Seattle. I think that Seattle, knowing what they have on the line, what they have to play for with a shot to get in on this game, a must-win situation for sure. Not 3 weeks ago in Dallas, but definitely this week is must-win for the Seattle Seahawks. I think Pete's going to have them ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, they know what they're getting in Kyler Murray. They practiced against it when Russell Wilson was still in the building, and a smarter passing version of it, by the way. So yeah, give me the Seahawks to handle the Cardinals on the road. The Chiefs battle the Rams. Who you got, Matt?
I'll take the Chiefs in this. I think they're locked into where they are at the 3 seed, but I think that they still want to end the season on a stronger note. And with all the injuries that are going around the Chargers, I don't see them putting up too much of a fight.
This is I agree with that too, and it's because of the Chargers. I just see them losing.
More than anything else, yes.
Yes, correct. The LA Rams head to San Francisco in Santa Clara to battle the 49ers. And listen, I'll lead with this. For my money as a Niner follower, this game just looks only dangerous for the 49ers. There's no incentive for either team necessarily to win. And the Niners, can only rest so many people. If you don't rest, if you rest Trent Williams, you're putting Brock Purdy and others at risk. It's just, I think it's an unfortunate scenario. So, I mean, unless they're going to come out and I'm trying to tank style and play only backups, I don't know how you can be safe, but then you can't do that without making your guys wait 2 weeks. So it's a difficult concept here. I don't know. Either way, because the Rams have had that many struggles against the 49ers, I'm going to pick the Niners in this one just on past history. Matt.
Yeah, I think in my mind, similar to Baltimore, San Fran probably plays their guys for a quarter, a half. Los Angeles could drop to the 7 seed if they lose and other teams win. So would they rather go to Dallas, go to Detroit? I think ultimately they'd rather go to Detroit. So you'll see a little bit more effort out of the Rams in that end. So give me the Rams, but neither team is going to be kind of pushing it. I think we could see multiple starters on both sides.
I'd like to see a Rams Cowboys rematch. That's intriguing to me. Maybe I'm the problem, but with that in mind,
but the NFL would love to see Stafford versus Detroit.
That is an excellent point, my friend. I did the homecoming game. I like that. That's smart by you. I like that. The Cowboys head over to battle the Commanders. Cowboys trying to lock up that 2 seed. Do you think they handle Sam Howell and company?
I think they do. Ultimately, again, weather in the area is probably going to make it a closer game than most Cowboys fans will want it to be. But I think ultimately knowing what's on the line there, similar to a little different from last season. I know a lot of Dallas fans will say, well, we lost to the Commanders last year in week 18, and they did, but at the same time, they needed a lot of things to go in different directions to get to a better seed. In this point, they control their own destiny, so that is going to give them more incentive.
I can't agree more. The Red Tails are bad, and the Cowboys are they're good, not great, but they're not bad. Meaning, I think the Cowboys will win on the road and lock up that 2 seed, being a lot more dangerous in the playoffs than I would have previously thought. Bills do battle with the Dolphins to decide the AFC East, an actual must-win game, Matt Muehleisen, if you're trying to decide that division. Miami hosting, who you got?
I like Miami in this one. I think what we've seen out of Buffalo is just kind of nonchalance overall with, the way they can do things. They've had multiple instances where they could have kind of punched their own ticket and haven't looked really sharp. I know that the pundits after the Dallas game said they were the scariest team in the NFL, and it was more of a let's wait and see if they really are. And they've shown these last 2 weeks that they necessarily aren't. They could be, but I think that just given that lack of overall seriousness is going to come back and ultimately cost them. Whereas Miami, aside from the Tennessee game that EJ likes to point out all the time, have really taken care of business when they've had to, aside from the Ravens game, which a lot of injuries played a role in that too. So give me the Dolphins, just as they seem to be getting some pieces back.
By the way, you mentioned that Ravens game, Matt. That game, as it is for many teams, the week after they play the Ravens is a big factor here. You mentioned the defensive tragedies, basically. Listen, I always thought Jalen Ramsey was overrated, but they're a better team with him than without him in coverage. He's he's underperformed throughout the year. I think Xavier Howard is out for the rest of the season, and Chubb, their linebacker, is also out for the year as well. I mean, basically a worst case scenario defensively. By the way, Jay Waddle, he's out. Well, at the very least, limited. We'll see what happens. High ankle sprain, blah, blah, blah. Whatever state Tyreek Hill is in, he'll be less of a factor than you'd like if you're a Dolphin fan. There's a lot of reasons here, other than the weather, of course, to pick Miami based on the intangibles. But there's one intangible I can't account for, and that's this friggin' offense for the Buffalo Bills. Highest ceiling, lowest floor. The degree and margin of error in performance is just completely unpredictable, and I have no reason to believe, to your point, Matt, that these sneaking by weaker teams' wins that they've done the past 3-4 weeks or so are enough to make me convinced that they can get past a Mike McDaniel coached team. The Bills have their own defensive injury woes as anything else. At the end of the day, as much as I'd like to pick the Bills here and secure me being correct about them making the playoffs, I have the Finns taking care of business and securing the divisional victory. And that'll do it for the picks this week. We got Reid coming on next from the Markcast to talk a little bit of spring football merger. But before that, Matt Muehleisen, tell the world where you can be found.
Yeah, absolutely. You can follow me on all platforms at Teaching to the Choir. You can hear me on Mondays on the Maximize Monday podcast, Tuesdays on Huddle Up, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays on the 3CT podcast. And starting in the spring, going to dive a little bit more into the pitch as well, get some more baseball and soccer news content coming to the Huddle Up Network.
Hey, man, listen, I love that you're aboard. I'm trying my best not to be offended by the fact that you insist on your quota for EJ's show appearances being higher than mine, but maybe I just need to call you up more. I need somebody to talk Sixers with here in the NBA season, so I'm sure we can arrange that.
For sure. Absolutely.
All right, honor, joy, and pleasure. Thanks for coming aboard, buddy.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Now, anybody who was within any sort of breathing distance of football this weekend in any way, shape, form, or fashion, you got information about spring football. A big deal to me. I know that recent decisions have, let's just say, influenced my springtime plans and the springtime plans of this gentleman, my guy, Reid Johnson of the Markcast. Listen, Reid, I know you do Canadian football. I know you did the XFL and USFL. I have no idea how you keep track of all of it, but you do. And listen, it's the only thing more smooth, I think, is your beard. I'll be honest with you. And I mention all that. I butter you up because I have to lead with a condolences. Listen, I know the merger just happened. You were a big Sea Dragons guy. I would argue probably the most fun team in the XFL the last year. Of course, I had a lot of fun covering my Guardians. They just didn't have as many in the win column. That is what it is. Should have beaten the would-be champs twice, but we don't have to talk about that right now. But let me start off with the most obvious, Reid. Obviously, USFL, XFL merging to become the UFL. Listen, I followed the Guardians. Picking a name that's already existed with the Orlando Guardians, I'm used to them picking. Why not just double down with the UFL and repeating a name that happened in the past? That's fine. That's aesthetics. But what does this merger kind of point to that the leagues were struggling? Is this merger meant to be kind of a hope for a synergy to lift spring football? I know The Rock said that he's looking for this to be the premier spring football offering for years to come, I think was the way he put it. What do you read into it with what you've observed?
First of all, I do like the premier part of it. We've called ourselves America's premier CFL podcast for a long time, so I think that's funny that they use the word. It's happenstance. There's really no way to look at this and not have it be unexciting, right? Just going from 16 to 8, and they can say whatever they want in terms of we're banding together. Even on our stream last night, where we had talking about where we officially now we've known the cities and teams for a while, but officially have all that. We still have people on the stream like, wait, there's only 8 teams. Like I thought there'd be 10. I thought there'd be 12. I thought there'd be, 16, 20. Like no way. I think both of these corporations, with Fox and Redbird, realized maybe the market isn't as rich as we thought for both of us competing in the same space. And so as opposed to cannibalizing each other, let's get together and kind of figure this out, which is probably what they should have done all along, right? I mean, Fox was the ones that kind of jumped the gun and tried to get the USFL back in 2022 when the XFL took its kind of they had their talks with the CFL and kind of took another year to establish. If that hadn't happened, I think we would have gotten to this point maybe eventually. But yeah, it's certainly combining all of this to try to save face here a little bit.
Yeah, I don't feel like this is a surprise. I mean, you and I think we're both separately in our own way saying, yeah, it might be coming. It's not here yet. Everything else is talk. I don't know that I expected it quite this quickly. I kind of expected year 2 for the XFL to go down, but that's not what happened here. Do you feel like this is an indication that the XFL felt like it was rocky? I know I'm asking you for you to speculate a bit. I thought they did well enough. Certainly the TV numbers were solid, but do you think that was their point of view?
I think both of these leagues overestimated the appetite right now. And I've said this a lot on the podcast. And I remember when the XFL announced its comeback, originally back here post bankruptcy with Danny and Dwayne and my old co-host Paul and I, like, we're going to put our first episode out and like, the thousands and thousands of views are going to come in because this is so exciting. And you're like, okay, like it's taken me a long time to figure out kind of the nicheness of this. I've always thought maybe with Rock and kind of being in the DC universe would understand a little bit more of building that. But no, I think Redbird, if not laying off a majority of your marketing staff immediately following the season is an indication how they felt the season went. And then obviously with USFL, there's been this debate, right? The USFL did the all hub model where the XFL, okay, we're hubbing, but we're flying out to the cities. USFL had multiple hubs, but clearly that model wasn't showing enough growth or progress as they would have wanted because they wouldn't have taken this call, right? If we're building in our hub model, if we're happy with the fan bases, we saw Birmingham attendance down season 2. Obviously, all the teams were there the first year. I think both of these both ownership groups saw enough concerns here to want to kind of figure this out.
Yeah, that's certainly what that. Yeah, I certainly see where you're coming from with that 100%. With that in mind, obviously the big announcement, March, they're coming, with the 2 former champions. I shouldn't say former. We'll say previous champions, because the both defending champions. There we go. Right, let's do it that way. The defending champions, the Stallions, and the Renegades to kick things off, of course, on March 30th. The thing that jumps off the palette to me, Reid, I mean, listen, pardon my own bias. I just love covering football here in my town, as a press guy doing my thing. That's how you found me to be on your show the first time, and how we got going was me just doing that. But the absence of the state of Florida is very interesting to me. Now, obviously, they're basing in Texas and football. Like, who needs religion? We have football. I get it. But I find it interesting some of the other choices they have. Like, they have the Memphis, the Showboats in place. I mean, by my count, we have what looks like 5 former XFL teams and 3 of the USFL teams in play here. Obviously Texas centric. What say you about some of the decisions they made? Obviously California excluded. I can get that with the travel. Maybe the same thing with Florida. I don't know. What do you think of that?
It's really hard. So the reason why obviously there's the three Texas teams, and they're calling one of them now a USFL team, even though it's the USFL team adopting the XFL branding. So there's
with the Gamblers, right?
Yeah. So there's 4 XFL teams and 4 USFL teams, although there's 5 XFL brands and 3 USFL brands. So the team, the Gamblers, their staff, their players, they're all there under a name. But to me, the 3 Texas teams, people always had concerns about that, but obviously XFL based out of there, we're doing the hub. But you still had Seattle, Vegas, Orlando here to kind of round out the states. where now, like you said, and we talked about it on our stream, they're posting the map of all the cities and the team logos, and where are you cheering from? And it cuts off at Texas, and it cuts off the northeastern corner of America too. And you're like, well, that's one way to visualize the United States, right? Is Texas over. The USFL, Birmingham is not a large television market. Now it's a very passionate fan base. The team, I mean, it's the twice winning, USFL. I have my championship t-shirt on here. I mean, that's a good team and it's a good market, but I would not say, if you were to ask me, Reid, what are 3 paramount franchises we need in this UFL, you would say Memphis, Birmingham, and Detroit. I mean, Detroit now upswing with the Lions, but even they're competing. So it's weird. The Florida thing is huge. I get for you because of obviously everything there with the college stuff as well. But excluding even just the San Diego in there, I think would have helped a lot just to make it feel like it was a little bit more coast to coast, because you're excluding New York, you're excluding LA. There's a lot of major markets, Chicago. There's a lot of major markets that aren't in this.
Yeah, no, and I get listen, obviously I love that the Beer Snake was enough to keep the DC team alive. I don't want to just be all, you excluded Florida, this was bad decision. Like, I want to acknowledge you got some stuff right. The Battlehawks slammed the table, pounded their fist on the table to keep their franchise, and showed out in ways that the rest of the XFL teams didn't. And it was impressive. The Beer Snake in that tradition kept the defenders alive. I love how they got that part right. The Brahmas is weird to me. I think they kind of just got let in on a technicality because that's the closest to the hub. I'm like, well, I mean, Orlando didn't win and we don't have to drive very far. So, but, and of course the joke here would be in Orlando. I mean, the green that they went with the USF colors, well, that was ugly enough to kill the whole thing. He said jokingly, that's a joke. Settle down, Bolt fans. But only maybe a little bit, though. I do cover UCF for the black and gold banneret, so that's a thing. Bing! But with all that in mind, so obviously March 30th, going to be the kickoff. I don't think they've talked a whole lot about what, rules they're going to adopt and keep the same. I know we have Wade Phillips in place, replacing Charlie Ward with the Brahmas.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you will about that. Obviously, with the Roughnecks, the former Gamblers, who are now the Roughnecks, is a different team, but the XFL Roughnecks, getting to the semifinal game and being basically a dominant team throughout. You get it. But what's some of the more on the field stuff you've heard? Like, I'm praying they keep Dean Blandino and that whole setup, or whoever. It doesn't have to be Blandino. I just know he did a good job. I still think he's ridiculous on CBS, yet somehow magically when he steps in the XFL and does it that way, he's awesome. I don't know how that works. It might just be the transparency. But what aspects have you heard that they're keeping? What do you hope they keep?
Yeah, it's funny just when I laugh when you were talking about like, oh, how great the Beer Snake was, and obviously including like word was that there was conversations in XFL ownership of like, oh, we didn't know what that was. So like, as great as the Beer Snake is now and as illustrious is, Russ Brandon had an interview with ESPN St. Louis, I believe yesterday. We talked about it. Blandino's going to be a part of it, same as Pereira. So the assumption we're working on is obviously a mixture of the rules right now. USFL rules are a lot of XFL rules. Anyway, XFL obviously has its kickoff. I don't like the USFL. We just kick back. I think it's from the 20 at this point. Like we're getting it further and further away so we don't get a touchback. I think the XFL one looks different on TV. I think when you see it, you go, okay, that's something that's different that we can work with. So yeah, I would imagine they're both in there, but football-wise, it's a conglomeration of both. Russ Giglio is still involved. Doug Whaley's going to be there. You're going to have Jim Pop, who is the executive been with CFL forever, a legend. He's still going to be with the USFL. So it really is, if nothing else, and I still am questioning kind of this marketing play that we have, if we can talk about that later, but like football-wise, I think it should be very good because there's many, many, many smart people involved in this, at least football-wise.
Yeah, no, and listen, since we're there, I think the XFL kickoff should reign supreme. It's an awesome product. I personally think the NFL should also adopt it, but that's a whole other question there too. I'm 1,000,000,000% on board with you on that. So you mentioned you were about to get into some of the marketeering of it, some of it that you like, some of it that you don't. Walk me through that.
Well, so the big thing, and of course, no greater time to drop all this news is like New Year's Eve day, and then New Year's Day, 7 a.m. Pacific, for us on the West Coast, which speaks to, tell me you don't have any West Coast teams while scheduling something at 7 a.m. on New Year's Day. But to me, because they did the NFL on Fox, they had, Danny and Dwayne there kind of with all those guys. And then you had them back on the College Game Day thing on Monday. And so they're like, we can work with Fox now. We can get this synergy right. We want to get the college fan. How can we get, but I suppose, both these leagues have operated now, USFL for 2 seasons and the XFL. So it's not like either one doesn't know, people know what these are if you've at least tangentially heard about it. But we still have The Rock on there talking like, well, I'm player 54 and there's 53 on the roster. And I'm like, if we're just going to diatribe this whole thing now and call it the UFL, like, I would have thought there would have been a spark in some sort of the liner notes that The Rock had coming into this, that it felt like it's the same brand. It's the same wording that we had for the XFL. Like we're trying to get guys, this is the landing spot for them, but now we're just calling it something different and we're combining. They need to let this league live on its own and not just be a landing spot for the NFL, because spoiler alert, there's not that many of the guys that actually made it this year. Brandon Aubrey's killing it with the Cowboys, who I hate as a Commanders fan. I hope he, twists his ankle. Not too bad, just, enough to kind of hurt that.
The game. I got you. Yeah, right.
But that just when you watch the XFL broadcast, it was so much of like, this guy wants to get to the NFL. This guy wants, and you're like, well, why am I watching now? Like, you need to make this be interesting now. And so to me, they've never figured that out. I equated it a lot to NXT with WWE back when NXT kind of had its, we had Tommaso Ciampa and Johnny Gargano and all that stuff. Like, how can we make this an exciting product on its own, whilst also people knowing that these guys eventually want to get to the WWE? And they've never figured that out. This is still just, we are trying to get people to the next. Maybe you can watch them while they're here.
Well, and here's my thing too, Reid, and I don't know how the calendar will obviously be a challenge. Let me lean on that first, but I feel like this is something you should mix in somehow with the NFL draft, right? Because other guys, I remember the past season when these leagues were kicking off, all the prospects that were there were all like, nah, I'm not even thinking about that, right? Now, I'll grant you, if you're getting drafted in any of the 3 days of the draft, chances are you won't be headed to, what is now the UFL. But I think there's something to be said, because the draftniks are crazy, man. They're doing mocks all throughout the year and stuff. So if they find a way to kind of synergize with that maybe and lean into that and make the undrafted free agency market, or even somehow ingrain themselves into part of the NFL preseason for those cats that miss a roster, maybe that's kind of a way to lean into it as well. I'll put it this way. I'm with you. I know they were trying to do it. Oh, it's the new year. That's fine. But I'm with you. I think everybody's going to forget it as what's the air quotes third season within a season for the NFL. The playoffs will make everybody forget what you just said there, Dwayne. And you went on College Game Day right before the CFP, which people are still talking more about FSU getting snubbed, which they weren't snubbed, but that's a whole other conversation. Yeah, But they're still talking more about that, I think, than their brand, and probably will be after the national championship, because they did it then. The whole marketeering of leaning into the Super Bowl being that transition point, I thought was awesome by the XFL. Heck, the USFL even did the same thing with the whole "we have real football" thing, which, I mean, I know you and I both hated that, but yeah, I feel like if they can ingrain in that part of it, that would be a bit more successful. Do I have something there?
Yeah, I mean, so they really tried that last year with the NFL Alumni Academy. That was kind of it was like, it wasn't officially, like, it wasn't the NFL, like they called it the NFL Alumni Academy. It wasn't like, they worked together. It wasn't like an official whatever, but it was, and the XFL, where they were going to take those guys that had worked through the program and graduated, and then if you weren't picked up or you made it through the program, you were guaranteed a camp spot. Well, the problem was, spoiler alert, there's a lot of people that do really want to play spring football, right? And there's going to be even more now that you only have 8 teams versus 16, because there was still an overwhelming number when there was 16. And so you had all these guys graduate the program, and then the teams are like, we're full, or we don't have, or okay, let's bring them on, and then we're just going to cut them anyway. So like they're trying to get that. I hope now if we're like, we're on the NFL on Fox, we're doing the broadcast, but to me, these leagues have to prove that they can kind of stand at least for a year or two here. I mean, the XFL, like, they came in with all of this, ownership, and Danny and the Dwayne, like, we came in, we're in this for the long term. We're in this. We want this to be 100-year brand. And they make it through one season, lose money. And then it's like, well, we got to figure out something else. Like you got to lose money at this at some point. And the USFL seems
they expected to lose money. That's the part that boggles me. I'm with you. I would add that I listen. 5 feet from Danny Garcia in the press box here in Orlando, we do expect to possibly lose money and not necessarily turn a profit. Like those were things that happened, and then they just ran from it. I don't get it.
Yeah, I guess I think it's easier said. And the Forbes report came out and it was 60 million, and people said that number was low and it was actually higher. Spoiler alert, the USFL had expenses too, but when you have Fox, they can write off a lot of that stuff. Yeah. I think that's where all of that went. But yeah, neither of these seem like. And we're doing this now and we're calling it, and the ad's cool and whatever, but like we're still, we're January 3rd, we're less than 90 days out. We're doing the dispersal draft this week, Friday, I guess, posting Monday, trying to figure out like, okay, what do we do with these leftover players? There's been all these different leagues and everything. It just doesn't feel like it's a cohesive thing here going in with 3 months to go.
Yeah, well, and I felt that was the same issue with the XFL with it last year. Yeah, I could only imagine what adding another year within the league would do. You're much more knowledgeable in the USFL. I don't know how cohesive they were. I could just tell you it felt like the XFL was rather disjointed. So, adding another league, I wouldn't imagine that making it easier. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, like, even, this 5-3 split, and we got to have 4 USFL, and we're doing the conferences, right, which I'm glad that they kept some of that IP, because I didn't even realize these debates, like, are they going to be north-south divisions or east-west? Or we had one of the players had leaked an email, XFL and USFL. I like that because, shoot, if you're the USFL, you spent a year and a half suing the former USFL for the rights to use these trademarks. So, like, I'm glad that, but people thought maybe they're going to drop them, and it's the same with the XFL. So at least that's maintaining there, but it still feels like, I don't know. To me, I've said it's like if you're in science class and you're like partnered with the guy or girl that you really don't like, and you're like, here, you got to sit and figure out how to kind of like, do this experiment, but you don't really want to. You're kind of like unwilling partners, but you're both going to get an F if you don't, complete it.
Hey, necessity is the mother of invention. If you're going to use the science example, I'm with you on that. Well, listen, I got to tell you, I appreciate you stepping in and kind of walking me through it a little bit there too. I know there's probably going to be a lot more information to come. You mentioned the dispersal draft be coming out in a press release here on Monday. You had mentioned you had the stream. I'm assuming that's your YouTube channel. So check that out if you haven't yet. Good information, good times, by the way, entertainment as well. But yeah, Reid, tell the people where you can be found, my guy.
Yeah, the Markcast.com, everything's on there, and you can search all that stuff on, like Twitter or X, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, Markcast.com. We do a lot of CFL coverage as well. We're kind of in the off season for that, but anything kind of alternative football here in the States, we'll dabble in a little arena or indoor or any of that stuff, but mostly this. And with the UFL now, 3 months to go, the plan is presumably to be, I think, in Arlington for the kickoff here on the 30th. If you market it right, and this is, the defending XFL champion versus the defending USFL champion in the kickoff. If you do it right, I think you can get some money out of that. I just don't know if they will do that or not. But that's, in theory.
If you do it right is the $5,000 question there. No question. Beyond a reasonable doubt, my friend. So, Reid, thanks for jumping aboard, man. We'll catch you next time. And next time there's some big news, I will remain a student and let you educate me thus.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks again to, of course, Reid Johnson of the Markcast. Thank you also to Matt Muehleisen, a family member of the Huddle Up Podcast family, as we've been saying earlier in this show. But of course, I am Kyle Nash, the student of the game. You can find me on Twitter at the SOTG. Find me on Instagram as the same, the SOTG. Find me on Threads as the SOTG. Check out my Facebook page as well, the student of the game. My writings with the Black and Gold Banneret as I'm covering women's basketball there for UCF currently. I thought I'd lead with that. Of course, my work with the Jag Report covering the Jacksonville Jaguars season finale this weekend. By the way, a couple days here, look out for me and my friend Travis Holmes of Big Cat Country as we do the Duval Dive at 11:15 in the morning on Friday. Not sure if we're going to do a playoff edition, so it might be the last one, so check that out. Of course, we're looking into doing a watch-along for the final game against the Titans for all the marbles in the AFC South. Look for that as well as my work covering the Orlando Magic with A7BN Sports. An honor, joy, and privilege to have you guys aboard. But until next time, everyone, class dismissed.